Hello, so a short little video here on overwintering of honeybees. Don't let the blue skies and sunshine deceive you. It is actually very, very cold here in northeastern Ohio, and the wind is starting to pick up, and I'm going to try to get through this video without losing sensation in my fingers and toes. So I want to start off by saying that honeybees are not native to the United States. They are actually subtropical to tropical insects. And although evolution has equipped honeybees with the hoarding tendency, that hoarding instinct, to carry them through during lean times, and also the ability to huddle up when temperatures become cold, winter is still very much a struggle for honeybees. So winter protection is one good way to give honeybees the edge that they need during harsh weather and to assure the integrity and the viability of the hive. And so hopefully come spring, you and I both have healthy hives so that we can begin our next honey producing season. So what happens when temperatures drop below 50 degrees? The bees retreat inside the hive, and they kind of go through one big 3-month slumber party. So what happens here is that the worker bees huddle together, they surround the queen. So the queen is in the center. And the main job, the main responsibility of the worker bees during the winter is to keep the queen fed, to keep the queen warm, and to keep her safe. We all know that if we don't have a healthy queen or a queen at all, then we can't have a honeybee hive. So they formulate this cluster, and in the center of the cluster, the optimal temperature where the queen is 95 degrees. That is what it must be in order for the queen to survive. Now, as you go further on out to the outer shell, the temperature gradually starts to become cooler so that the outer periphery of the shell is somewhere around 45 to 50 degrees. So we know that 45 degrees is not optimal temperature for the worker bees to survive. So what they do is kind of a rotational system. So the bees on the outer shell gradually start to migrate inward where it's warmer, and the bees that are in the inner core of the shell where it's toasty 95, they start to migrate out. So they sort of shift positions and take turns in order to survive. So the bees huddle together so closely that their little wings interlace. And the colder it is outside, the tighter that cluster is going to be. And then sometimes we get warmer weather in the winter. So then they loosen up that cluster a bit. It gets colder, so they tighten it up. And that is kind of how they survive during the winter with their clustering. So worker bees do a lot of fluttering of their flight muscles. Not their wings, their flight muscles constantly throughout the winter. And they also do a lot of shivering. So this constant motion and continuous use of energy is actually how they keep the inside hive temperature warm. Now, doing this constant movement, and many people think that bees hibernate during the winter. Well, they absolutely do not. So they're not out there foraging like they do in the spring and summer, but they do a different kind of activity inside, like I just described, the fluttering and the shivering activity. And all of this requires energy. So the honeybees need a sufficient supply of honey in order to survive. So it's really important as part of the the winter preparation, that you make sure that your hive has plenty of honey stores in it, because it is estimated that honeybees will consume about 30 pounds of honey during a winter season. So I know that I've read about honey, about pollen patties that can be put in the hive. They can be laid up on top of the frames. But the thing is, the pollen patties are for the larvae. The honeybees will not eat the pollen patties. They need the pure 100% honey to survive. So that needs to be considered. This is my first winter with my honeybees, so I kept all of the frames of honey inside the hive. And I'm hoping that they have enough to survive the winter. I didn't use any for my own personal use, no honey producing here for me, at least this year. Now, next year, hopefully that will be different and I'll be able to use some of the supply for my own personal use. Now, the queen does not lay eggs during the winter. So there's no purpose for the drones, because the drones, the boy bees, their sole purpose in life is to mate with the queen. So if the queen isn't laying eggs, the drones are not needed. So part of the winter preparation process that the worker bees go through is they literally kick the drone bees out of the hive. They don't need them, because the drones are just going to use from the resources within the hive. So they literally kick them out. And I was a little bit surprised and actually worried come autumn, when I started to see literally hundreds of bees outside the hive and they were all dead. And I didn't quite know what that was all about until I did a little research and found out, oh, it's the process of actually overwintering that the honeybees do to actually get rid of the drones. So then I thought, well, if all the drones are gone, then what about spring when we need drones and the mating starts to go on? Well, in the spring, the queen will actually lay unfertilized eggs, and then they turn into drones. So that's kind of what happens there. So the worker bees start their overwintering process actually in fall. And what they do is they secrete propolis. Propolis is like a resin, a very sticky glue. And then they start to actually, what I want to say is like caulk up all the seams, all the areas of the hive to make insulation. So when I was doing a hive inspection sometime in the fall, I was wondering why it was really difficult to get the frames out. They were really stuck on, until I realized, well, they were doing the overwintering process and they secreted the propolis to seal everything literally within the hive. So here's what I have done for my overwintering process. First of all, hive wraps. Now, if you live in a warmer, more temperate climate, there wouldn't be a need for hive wraps. But living in northeastern Ohio, where the weather can get very, very cold, and we will get a lot of snow, and the snow will probably cover the hive, and it will drop below freezing. It is necessary, it is a good idea, let's put it this way, to wrap the hive. So some people will wrap the hive in black tar paper. So I decided not to do that. I actually purchased a hive wrap through Be Cozy. And I put the hive wrap on when the temperatures kind of got to be consistently in the 30s. So what I did was I stomped on the wrap to deflate it, because it will be rather puffy when you remove it from the box. So I stomped on it to get rid of the air inside it. And I had to take the top cover off, and then I just simply placed the wrap over the hive. And The seam is supposed to be in the front. I also put a few nails on top of the mouse guard, and that is so that the hive wrap does not slide down and cover over the front entrance. You never want that, because the front entrance is the bee hive's source of ventilation, number one. And number two, during warmer weather, when it gets to be above 50, because we get that in Ohio, it can be below freezing one day and it could be 50s or maybe even a 60 another day. And so the bees will leave the hive momentarily and do a cleansing flight. And then they will also take that opportunity to do a hive cleanup. So any debris, any dead bees inside that hive, they can do the removal of that during the nice warmer weather. So there's nothing too much about a hive inspection in the winter except to periodically come out and make sure that there's no debris in front of the front entrance. And so make sure that there's no snow that's covering it, or leaves that are fallen, or any type of environmental debris. The mouse guard is also really important to put on too in fall, because mice obviously will use a hive to use it as a nesting ground. So that would not be such a good thing, because you definitely would lose your hive at that point. So the mouse guard got put on as part of my overwintering process in early fall. Actually, I put that on. So wind protection. So many people will put bales of hay in front of their hive, or kind of surrounding it where the areas that the wind drift in. So I've even read an article about people using aluminum doors to kind of frame up around the hive to prevent a windshield protection. Now my hive is kind of in a woodsy area, and I think it's fairly protected against the wind. So I have not done anything in terms of wind protection back here. However, there is supposed to be gale force winds tomorrow, and I'm actually almost thinking of maybe buying some bales of hay. I don't know. I'll think about that one during the course of the day. So the other thing that I have is an inner cover pad. So the inner cover pad prevents heat loss from the top of the hive, and it absorbs any moisture that accumulates. The process of bees breathing and shivering will produce moisture and condensation. So for that reason, I have actually used insulation that I got from Lowe's, and it's about 1 inch thick, and I put a layer of aluminum foil over it. So I put this underneath my top cover. I just cut out a sheet of it just to kind of fit inside there. The foil side down, facing the bees. Okay, what I like about the insulation is that it will absorb any kind of moisture and condensation. So some people can use styrofoam, or they can use drywall and cut that out and place it there. I don't like the styrofoam idea, because I have read that the bees will chew away at that. So I don't think that that is a really wise thing to use. So also, I bought just a little kind of sample of the insulation. Normally insulation does have like an aluminum bottom to it, but that would be like a big $30 big huge bale of insulation, and I didn't really want to pay that much. So I just bought a small little package. It did not have the aluminum foil on it, so I just made my own, and it was under $10 for that. So, and I think I said that you place that underneath the top cover, between the top cover and the inner board there. So Ventilation. So bees shiver and they produce condensation. So you want to keep that in mind, because when condensation accumulates in the hive, it's going to drip down on the bees. Bees can possibly tolerate very cold winter conditions, but they absolutely cannot tolerate damp moisture on them. They will die. So that you need to be considerate of that. So in order to take care of that problem, I shimmed up the top cover about 1/4 of an inch in the front. I just put a little shim there, and to lift it up a little bit to provide some ventilation from the top of the hive. The other thing that I did too was I placed shims in the back of the hive to lift it up from the bottom board, the bottom of the hive. I shimmed it up so that it's like about 1/2 inch upright, so that the back of the hive is going to be tilted slightly up about 1/2 inch, and there's going to be that decline. So when there is that moisture and condensation that does accumulate, it can just drip out from the bottom board. So, and I can't say enough about how that moisture and condensation will literally kill your beehive if you don't take measures to address that. So I think that I covered the most important points here. I think it's interesting how when we are cooped up in the house, how antsy we get in the winter. And I think now I'll think about the bees and how cooped up they must feel during their 3-month overwintering process inside their hive. Well, my fingers are starting to get a little bit cold, and so with my toes. So I think I'm going to end this video. I really hope that you've learned something, and as always, be happy.